The first problem is that the best leaders, the people most in line, the people who understand the problems of the company best, your engineers and technical people, they're not leading the organization. Nobody wants to be a manager, and it's destroying the future of American business. Okay, that might be a little extreme, but based on some conversations I've been having recently, I don't think it's too far off the mark. Today, I really want to dive into this idea of whether or not people want to become managers and what that means within your organization. If this is your first time on the show, my name is Matt Jertson. I'm a former Air Force instructor pilot, former head of training and development at SpaceX, and now I run a company called Better Everyday Studios, where we focus on helping individual contributors transform into successful people managers. I was having a conversation with an HR business partner just a week or so ago. This is a massive, globally known technology organization. And she was telling me that they're terrified for their future pipeline because none of their engineers, none of their engineering talent, none of their great individual technical contributors want to become people managers. They don't know what they're going to do. They don't know how they're going to fill the leadership pipeline of their future. And I think this is a really common problem. I think it's our fault. By our fault, I mean HR, like the kind of the group that I tend to belong to. But I think there's a way to solve it. And so today, I again want to break this conversation down into three main parts. We're going to talk about why this is happening. We're going to talk about what is the cost to your organization. And then finally, we're going to talk about how to fix it. So why is this happening? Like I said, I'll say it straight. I think it's largely HR's fault, right? What does HR do to make it so that nobody wants to become a people manager, so that the most talented people don't want to go into management? Well, there's several things. First, we make management way too complicated. This isn't just within HR. There's lots of places that do this, but I think there's a tendency among support organizations within a company, supporting fields, whether that's us, whether that's supply chain, whether that's marketing, we're not the ones who are driving the business forward. We're not the tip of the spear. We have the tendency to try to want to make ourselves more important. We want a seat at the table. And so part of the way that we do that is we use really big words. We make everything seem really complicated. We have 18-part checklists. We have these really fancy charts and these frameworks that have all these components to them that you have to take a really long time to learn. We just make it all really, really complicated. And I don't think that helps anybody out, because it just doesn't, it makes the profession of being a manager seem not very approachable, right? To somebody that's never been in it before, and somebody who maybe, they became an engineer because they're really excited about engineering, and maybe they're not as excited about the people side of things. So naturally, if you make it seem really intimidating or unapproachable, they're just not going to approach it. And so that overcomplicated of it, I think, is the first thing. The second thing that I think we often do wrong is just the bureaucracy that we create. We create way too many rules. I mean, I remember recently reading No Rules Rules. This was the story about Netflix and their growth, and how one of the things that really helped them early on as an organization is they just didn't have a lot of rules. They kind of adopted the philosophy of, if like any corporate rule that you have, like the common example that they use is, rules on company travel, right? Like what plane tickets can you buy? What type of plane ticket can you buy? What kind of food should you get? That kind of thing. And ultimately, overarching rules for that are coming from the fact that people out in the business just aren't being responsible, that you're not holding them to high enough of a standard, that you're not holding them accountable. And if you just hold people accountable, clearly explain expectations, hold them accountable, then you don't actually need these bureaucratic rules. But as organizations grow, that can be really difficult. And so we just layer all these rules on top of ourselves. And so whether it's performance management, giving feedback, setting goals, all these things, we make extremely complicated systems. And the systems themselves are often very hard to understand and use. And so again, this kind of feeds into, first, just the language that we use about management doesn't make it super approachable. And then the systems and tools that we create for managers just end up wasting a whole bunch of time. I'm actually thinking of this in terms of like doctors, how when you hear about doctors today, I forget what the stats are, but they spend the vast majority of their time. I think it's something like for every hour a doctor spends with a patient, they spend 3 or 4 hours just filling out paperwork. In some places, that's almost the situation that we put managers in, where they have to spend so much time going to meetings that don't really apply to them, documenting stuff, reviewing emails, writing emails, that they don't get to they don't feel like they're doing any real impactful work. And so we just we create too many rules, create too many barriers to actually doing good work. And so again, we're just making management not that approachable. And then the final thing that I think we do is we do HR, and businesses as a whole, just don't really look for the right things when they're trying to promote people. And so it just creates all these perverse incentives of who we're putting forward and why we would want to put them forward. And so all of that together as a result means that people just don't really want to do it. And so what does this cost? Because you could say, okay, great. So they don't want to do it, so somebody else does it. We go out and hire some MBAs or whatever. I think that has real problems for the business. The first problem is that the best leaders, the people most in line, the people who understand the problems of the company best, your engineers and technical people, they're not leading the organization. And you can look all throughout the business world at all the times we're putting in more of like a quote unquote business person, a sales leader, an MBA type or something, making them the head of a business. It very often doesn't go well. You think when Steve Jobs was first replaced at Apple, Steve Ballmer at Microsoft, there's lots of examples of where you take a quote unquote business person and put them in charge, and it doesn't really go well because the person at the top doesn't understand the fundamentals of the business. The examples that we see are obviously at the highest level of the CEO, but this trickles all the way down. If the leaders of teams don't understand the fundamentals of the problems that team is supposed to be solving, chances are you're gonna run into issues. And so if the people who are best situated to understand the problem aren't the ones leading, then almost by definition, you're gonna have worse leaders. The second problem that you're running into is the people who lead are leading for the wrong reasons, right? If the engineers, the ones who really want to do great work and solve problems, aren't stepping forward, then the people who step forward are probably going to be the ones who care more about themselves, who care more about raising their stature, who care more about, increasing their influence across the organization, and they wind up like trying to carve out a little fiefdom for themselves, something like that. That's obviously awful. I've seen in so many organizations just like political infighting that starts to happen that just ruins the productivity of an organization. And you just desperately want to stay away from that. And so then the third thing that can happen is hiring becomes extremely expensive. Promoting from within is much cheaper than hiring from the outside. If your engineers internally don't want to move up, then that means you have to go outside and try to hire people. And so you're left with two choices. Either you're going to hire people who aren't that technically savvy and run into the problems that we already talked about, or two, you're trying to find that needle in a haystack, that person who has the engineering experience, they have the leadership experience. Those people are few and far between, and that makes them very expensive. So you have leaders who don't fully understand the problems. You have leaders who care more about themselves and the business. You have really expensive leaders. These are real problems that are happening in your organization if engineers don't want to get promoted, if your individual contributors don't want to get promoted. So how do we solve that problem? I think, to me, all of this comes down to we need to get back to what I call first principles management. If you simplify what management means down to its most basic components, I think there are three things that managers do at a fundamental level. Number one, they get people to work together. Number two, they get people working on the right things. And number three, they help people improve their work over time. Those are the three fundamental things that a manager does. And if when you think about being a manager in your organization or promoting managers in an organization, if you focus on those three things, I think it really helps solve a lot of your problems. One, it makes being a manager much more approachable and simple, right? We're not worrying about all these crazy rules. We're not worrying about all these crazy systems. Can somebody do these things? Anybody in the organization, even a technical person, is going to understand what you're talking about, and it's going to be much more practical to them of like, oh, that's what okay, like I can figure out how to do that. And then it also gives you a very clear roadmap for what skills to watch out for, right? Is somebody naturally bringing people together for lunch and learns and doing that commonly just as a way to impart knowledge? Are they showing an interest in other people? Do they clearly care about their team members coming together, or are they kind of dividing them? And so to me, the biggest reason why our engineers aren't wanting to be promoted is because we're just overcomplicating it. So if that's the problem, the solution is to simplify it. And you simplify it with first principles management. If you want to know more, please reach out to me, matt@bettereverydaystudios.com. I would love to sit down and chat with you. If you are responsible for leadership development for an entire organization, just a small department, your individual team, I would love to figure out if we can have I would love to have a conversation with you to see if we can figure out how to make the managers in your organization better. We can dive deep into first principles management, figure out exactly the challenges that you're trying to face. And with that, I will see you next time on the Leadership Launchpad.